And good evening, everybody. Here we are. It's a third Tuesday of the month, and I'm here with Catherine Whittington and Deborah King. How are you ladies doing tonight?
I'm good. Matthew, how are you?
I am doing well. I'm so happy to be here. I look forward to this every month. So, and what we're doing here is just great. But we have some special guests tonight. So here's what we'll do. I'll let you guys introduce who we have, and then we'll just get into this extremely important topic that we're going to talk about tonight. So, Catherine, do you want to do the honors of your guest?
I will do the honors. So welcome everybody. Glad to be back. Tonight our topic is victim advocacy. We have great people on tonight. We have three incredible advocates from Homesafe, which is our local domestic violence shelter here in Ashtabula County. And then Deborah, I'll let you introduce Teresa.
Okay, we have Teresa Stafford from the Rape Crisis Center in Cleveland, who is also my soror. So welcome.
Awesome. So listen, this is really an important topic, that I think is front and center. It's always been front and center, but it's even front and center more so, or just as much now with the things that we've been going through the last year. So let's just kind of jump in and we'll just go back and forth. So Teresa, tell us a little bit about you and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Hey, good evening, everyone, and thank you for having me on here to have this important conversation. It's not often that we actually get to have a conversation that's just about advocates and advocacy and the great work that we do with survivors of all types of victimization. I have had the fortunate privilege of supporting survivors of sexual violence, human trafficking, domestic violence, homicide families, and other victimizations throughout my career. But I'm here tonight joining you all in my role as the Chief Program Officer at Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. I oversee the team of advocates that support survivors of human trafficking and sexual violence throughout the entire criminal justice system process. It's really important that survivors have access to community-based advocates, and these are advocates who are solely focused on the survivor's needs and supporting them and giving them the information that they can make to make an informed decision. Oftentimes, what some of the researchers out here is showing us too, from Dr. Rebecca Campbell from the University of Michigan, that when survivors of gender-based crimes have an advocate, they are more likely to stay engaged in the criminal justice system process, and we can get to some form of accountability. And so with the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, we actually have our services expanded in Cuyahoga County, Lake, Geauga, and Ashtabula County to help provide the services and provide additional support to the communities out here with the great work that they're already doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's just great that you're doing that. So let's hear from you ladies from Homesafe.
Well, the three of us work in the courts primarily, but we do mobile advocacy as well. So we are all over Ashtabula County, from Orwell and Williamsfield to Ashtabula City into Conneaut. We provide a variety of case management services, anything from finding housing for our survivors to getting them connected with services with the Rape Crisis Center. We work heavily with Catholic Charities, New Hope, Community Action, a lot of community counseling centers, Signature Health, Family Pride. We do a lot of referrals. When we go out and do mobile advocacy, a lot of it is safety planning and making sure that our survivors are safe. If they have children, we're working with Ashtabula County Children's Services and their caseworkers. Civil protection orders, criminal protection orders, temporary protection orders. We do all of it, it seems like. We've done food boxes. We've hooked people up with toiletries. We take donations. We give donations. We work in-house, out of house. We do a domestic violence support group on a private page so that it ensures the safety and confidentiality of our survivors. We do a lot of one-on-one conversations with our survivors. It's about touching base, finding a human connection, and just making sure that they're engaged and they know that they have options out there just to help them gain strength and confidence to leave their situations.
So I have a question for all you ladies, Teresa and our ladies at Homesafe. My question to you tonight is, victim advocacy looks so very different in all our fields that we work in. So what specific areas, I know how victim advocacy, I kind of cheat because I know our Homesafe legal advocates, but could you tell me a little bit more, Teresa, about your victim advocacy for the Rape Crisis Center, and then to the Homesafe legal advocates? If you could talk to me specifically about what your role is. Stephanie, I know you do, you know, you're in the courts and kind of a liaison to many of the judges, staff, and to the prosecutor's office. And then, you know, Shawneen, I know you do a lot of case management. And I know, Haley, you're new. So talking about maybe how you wound up in this role and where you see yourself for those victims, and what you really are looking to help them with.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that our advocates at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center do with survivors is very similar to what Homesafe just described. It's helping individuals access protection orders, safety planning, as well as even Title IX. A lot of times we hear about Title IX, we think about college campuses and universities. However, the majority of the clients that we're working with Title IX is in the K through 12 institutions. Unfortunately, before COVID, a lot of kids were sexually assaulted while they were attending school, and we had to make sure that the Title IX rules and guidelines were actually given to them so they could maintain the ability to go to school and be in a safe place. So we help with those Title IX requests and hearings, as well as supporting them as soon as they make a police report. If they want that support at a police station, we're able to be there with them at a police station as they're getting their interviews with prosecutors, and just helping them through that entire process. But so often, and I think this is what definitely with Homesafe, we're talking about that case management piece. So often survivors, there are barriers in society, or they have barriers that are in place that may prevent them from being able to access the services and stay engaged in the criminal justice process. So our advocates work to help them identify those barriers with case plans, and that way they can stay engaged. And what we find is sometimes it lowers the possibility for perpetrators to continue causing them harm too. When they have safe housing, they have adequate food, they have supportive services, even outside of us, because of one day our services are going to end, right? So what are the supportive services that they can have long-term? Connecting them to counseling, designing groups. Some of the groups that are designed to meet the certain needs of the populations that we're working with, and then working with our partners. We have been in communication with the director at Homesafe over the last few weeks at a high rate, looking at opportunities for us to really partner more, just due to the fact that a lot of funding cuts are coming to victim services program, which requires victim services programs to really work together and utilize our resources in the community in the best manner that's possible. So our advocates, like I said, do a lot of the similar things at Homesafe. We just have a high focus on sexual assault and human trafficking, and working with all age levels in all systems. Another thing real quick before I finish is that, you know, when we think about advocacy, we tend to think about victims getting their form of justice in the criminal justice system. But when it comes to perpetrators of sexual violence, we see that a very low percentage are ever held accountable within the criminal justice system. And so there's a civil system that people can get accountability, and the penalties is a little bit different over there. And so a lot of survivors are wanting to actually go through the civil system as well to get some form of justice, and providing that advocacy support there is something that's helpful. They might never win, they may never get the claim at the end of the day, but it's a system that has said, hey, this individual is accountable for harming you. And that right there is a lot of support for that individual, regardless of whether they have any financial attachment to it or not.
Ladies?
I guess
I have a question. I have a question real quick. When you're going through the criminal justice system, like you said, a lot of times they don't get the actual adjudication of guilt to hold their perpetrator accountable. What do we do to expose these predators? Is there anything that we can do to expose the predators to make them feel as bad as the victims they harm, because they put their business out in the street? How do we get them to be held accountable? Is there a magazine for sexual offenders, or is there something that you can look for to know that these people are those kind of violent criminals?
Unfortunately, no. There's not a lot out there. And you know, if the criminal justice system has said this person is not guilty for whatever reason, adjudicated them of the case, the survivors have to be really careful about defamation of character, and then they could turn around and be sued. And so that's why it's really important to make sure that they have other supportive services in place through that entire process, whether it's with advocacy, a counselor, whether it's with a community-based prosecutor, advocate, or a prosecutor advocate out of the prosecutor's office supporting them. That support will help them regardless of that outcome. So I think that's where that supportive stuff needs to be in place, because we can't control the outcome of the case or anything with that offender.
A lot of times it's the communication process and having that constant dialogue and making yourself available for the survivor, just to encourage them to continue communicating so that they don't shut down. A lot of times just knowing that somebody's listening and can empathize with them and understand, just allowing them time and space to voice what's in their heart and what has happened to them.
Yeah, I got a question. So this is such an important topic, but and I'll ask the two young ladies, why did y'all get into this area? What brought you to this particular field?
I am a survivor of domestic violence myself. So I actually never wanted to work in domestic violence because I knew how hard it was when I was going through it. And I thought it was going to be a difficult thing to go through again. But it turns out that actually living that has made me a much better advocate. And it really resonates with me. I love being able to help people and listen to people and just be there, because all they need is someone to lean on.
Yeah. So I'll say this real quick. I asked that question on purpose, and I felt like that that might be a possibility. Mm-hmm. And what Catherine and Deborah and I talk about in every show that we do is that we all have a story. We all have something that we come from. We all have a reason and a passion for what we do. And so I just want to tell you, I applaud what you're doing, because it's so important that we take our story and we take what happens to us and we really lift each other up and we help people out. So I just applaud you for what you're doing. I think it's a great thing. Haley, what about you?
Basically the same. I grew up in a super abusive household. And then later on in life, you know, I was not in very good relationships. I was fortunate enough to have a lot of really strong people, supportive people around me. And that's what I want to be for other people who don't have, you know, friends or family members who understand or who can be there for them. Then I want to be able to do that for other people.
Absolutely. And so all five of you are positive role models. I mean, I can already tell that just by being on here just 10 minutes with you, you know, that you're incredible role models. So again, appreciate everything that you do. And I think I'll say it one more time, it's so important that we share our stories, that we do what we do for a reason, and it is to help each other out. How much of a difference have y'all seen in the last year? I can tell you this, my wife is a nurse. She works in pediatric emergency department. And there has been a huge rise in physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, all kinds of abuse that have come into the pediatric ED. So I can only imagine just across the board. So what kind of things are you seeing? How has it changed, or has it changed in the last year?
Honestly, I spent the first half, probably the first 8 months, working inside the shelter almost exclusively. And what I've been able to notice and pick up on, and it's even being reflected in charges and police reports, is the involvement of children, not just witnessing the abuse, but they themselves being active participants, or they themselves being abused. And the ages are plummeting. So it's no longer teenager, preteen. These are young children.
Yeah. Teresa?
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think as schools are opening more, we're going to see an even larger increase of disclosures. You know, children typically disclose because they're going to school, they're engaging with people that are outside of their household, away from their abusers. And, you know, children have been locked down for a long period of time due to the pandemic. And now the school systems are opening back up slowly. We're going to see an increase. So what she was just saying about that, she already saw the increase. We're going to see another increase, and organizations are going to need to be prepared to meet the demand that we're going to have as a result of these disclosures. The other thing I'll say, when you're thinking about human trafficking, I'm highly concerned about human trafficking right now, because we know when individuals, due to social economic loss of jobs, due to high levels of stress, there are so many reasons that human trafficking increase. But unfortunately, what I have seen over since the pandemic is a decrease in identifying survivors of human trafficking, because they're not engaging with the healthcare system at a high rate anymore. They're not engaging with social service agencies and as they would typically would have outside of the pandemic. And so I'm just wondering, are we not identifying, and are these individuals being abused even more right now? So I think we have to look at this pandemic and the situation we're in and get creative with our community partners, get creative with our law enforcement, our prosecutors, so we can really make sure that we are not losing focus on some of the most vulnerable people in our society that are being victimized due to the circumstances that we are in.
And to piggyback on that, it was one thing that we have noticed as an influx, the three of us, especially over the last 8 months, are those that have severe mental illness.
Mm-hmm.
They're somebody somewhere is dropping the ball where they're ending up in the criminal justice system because of having to be at home because of the pandemic, and either not being able to get the services or being bumped out of whatever residential care facility and not being able to follow through with services. So they're ending up back home with either a parent, guardian, a significant other, but they're not getting treatment for that mental illness. And it's bringing them front and center to the court. And I know that our own mental health and recovery board is working on an option with our probate court, which makes us supremely happy.
Yes.
They don't, because they're going to end up victims themselves, and through no fault of their own mental illness. And any advocacy is the best advocacy, I think.
Yeah.
I have a question. Do you all see as many young men or men coming forward to file as being abused, or is it more predominantly still just females?
You know, for sexual violence, it's one of the most underreported crimes we have in the country. When you put that dynamic of gender, the male gender on top of that, you can see the reporting is not there. But when we hear about these stories, when these men are older, that they experience a high level of victimizations as children, and it's just not being recognized or identified, or because of the stigma that's associated with the victimization, you see a lot of them are not disclosing. I do believe we have to have our programs really start looking at not only providing services to females, but developing gender-specific services and having these responses in our messaging and marketing that will speak to men, because sometimes we miss the mark on that, honestly, where we're not actually speaking to men or young boys who might be victims of these type of crimes. They're being victimized. We're just not identifying it in the manner in which we should.
Yeah, that's true. That's
100.
Go ahead.
No, we are agreeing with that. We are seeing that even when we have a gentleman or a younger male come in to file a protection order, the response is typically, "You're a man.
Yeah.
She's hurting you." It's yes, you're absolutely correct in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously, yeah, that a man, or, man on woman, woman on man, man on man, that's a problem. And it is. And I've had, quite a few people in their older age come to me and say, well, this happened to me when I was young. And as a man, they're not going to talk about it. They're going to keep it to themselves. They're going to bury it. And then all the mental health problems that come with that, it just exacerbates over time, so I know it's a huge problem.
I worked in corrections in the first part of my career, and I worked with the male population at a high rate. And I would tell you, a lot of those men had sexual trauma at an early age in life, and their trauma manifested in ways that they engaged with the criminal justice system very early. The anger that they had inside was directly connected to their trauma. So I would love to see, especially in the juvenile justice system, that we increase our trauma screenings and are really screening to identify trauma that these young folks might have experienced, because we know that individuals at a young age who engage in the criminal justice system typically have had complex trauma, and a lot of that complex trauma is associated to not only gender-based violence, but sexual violence and exposure to domestic violence. And so if we can identify that as soon as they hit the system, instead of creating a case plan that's for penalties, for punishment, we can create case plans that help them rehabilitate and address the trauma that they have experienced. And that way we can hopefully lower the recidivism rate in the criminal justice system.
I think that is a great aspiration to have, because in therapy, I see that young men that have been traumatized early also delve into substance abuse on a high rate, and they're numbing everything. So they're ignoring the mental health issues of it. They're ignoring the trauma side of it, and they're just staying in a perpetual fog by just increasing the amount of alcohol or substance to the point that it takes their life, one way or the other. Because of the decisions they make, they may lose their freedom and go to jail the rest of their life. They may overdose. They may attempt suicide. Now you have another trauma on top of the traumas that they've already had. Where do we begin?
Yeah, no, you're so right. Yeah, it just keeps building and building and building over time. And I think that goes back to a lot of, how do you break the cycle? Right? Because there's a cycle. We all see that there's a cycle that plays out in this. If you are part of it when you were young, a lot of times you will fall into that same cycle when you're a parent or when you're an adult and you bring a child into the world, and then you're treating them the same way that you are unfortunately treated. So there's so much that goes into it. So what can we do to break the cycle? What can we do to put those programs in place to help people at a younger age? And what are y'all's thoughts on that?
Well, prevention is huge, and teaching children about healthy boundaries and teaching them to have a healthy self-esteem, teaching them that they're allowed to say, no, my daughter and I have had the dialogue that if she doesn't want to hug somebody, she doesn't have to. It's not a matter of disrespect, but it's her body, it's her choice. And I think that teaching children about that is huge, because a lot of kids feel like they have to listen to adults. Right. Toxic masculinity is huge. We need to get away from using derogatory terms that are centered around female qualities, or we need to get away from the gendered language in general, because it's not a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
I completely agree with that. Education is key, and education has to happen on so many different levels. We need to start talking to children about their body parts as soon as they are verbal. I can remember working cases where a young lady was talking about somebody putting coins in her pocketbook, and she kept telling this to people in her family. And one of her aunts was like, "This baby don't have a pocketbook. Where's your pocketbook?" And she pointed to her vagina, her private area. And so she was raised at a young age to say that her vagina was her pocketbook. She was disclosing, but people couldn't understand what she was talking about because she was not using medical terms. If a child can say pocketbook, they can say vagina. We need to really teach children the correct language and words for their body parts, and do exactly what the other young lady just said. If they're not comfortable, to speak up. Then the other part of it is we really have to talk about bullying. Bullying is something that, if we can talk about bullying at a young age, that starts the conversation and boundaries. So you can increase that as the children get older. You increase increase the topic of the conversation. So you can get to a topic of affirmative consent. When we're talking about consent, are you asking for consent when you're hugging and kissing? Are you asking for consent before you engage in sexual acts with an individual? And getting that yes, not just that you thinking the body is saying yes, but you're getting a yes, this is what I want to engage in. And that's what we are starting to teach you through our education programs at the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center, because these crimes are preventable, folks. We don't have to have people who've experienced domestic violence or sexual violence. And we have to get to a place where we have gender equity in our society. And I think when we have that gender equity in society, we will look at it a little bit differently, because we have to realize majority of folks who are, although men are victims of sexual violence and domestic violence, the majority of victims and survivors are females. Why is that? And so we have to get to the root of the inequitable practices that we have to get to the root of stopping this victimization that is too often gender-based.
I agree, because I've been, talking to different clients where the females say that when they go to tell the lawyer, the prosecutors, or the other side, the defense attorneys will be like, well, did you bring this on yourself? Your body language was asking for this. Nobody asks to be victimized. So we have to encourage them to acknowledge their feelings. It's okay to be upset. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to speak about that. You don't have to keep it a secret, because you're discrediting yourself because you know the secret. So you're in your own constant trauma because you can't share that burden with somebody. So we have to also work to make it where they feel comfortable enough to tell.
Yeah.
But Deborah, that's kind of hard, because you know why it's kind of hard? When I peruse Facebook and look at comments when people do disclose abuse, the comments are so scary, because people are constantly saying, well, what did she do? She's lying. She just want to go after the money. And if somebody is posting that on their Facebook page and they have a family member or their own child that's seeing those comments and seeing their own comments, they're not going to disclose. So I think people have to be really careful. We have to have this huge shift in society that we start believing victims, that we really truly understand trauma and how it manifests. And then I think the other thing of it is we have to stop normalizing this behavior and saying that, oh, it was just an accident, that person didn't mean it, and know that these actions are harmful and they're causing harm. And how we respond and how we talk about it is going to matter to the people around us, that hopefully nothing ever happens to them. But if we are talking about it in a manner where they think that if they disclose, I'll believe them, I'll support them, I'll give them the support that they need, they're more likely to disclose. But they hear me talking very negative about other victims, they're not going to disclose.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a sad statement, but it is so true, because social media is the worst thing in the world. You can get beat up so much on social media that's worse than taking an actual physical lick, because you're getting people to chime in that you have never met in your life, and you're feeling like they're judging you or calling you names, and you don't know how to defend yourself. And, cyberbullying is a major problem. It's a major problem. And when your own family doesn't believe you, it's hard for them to want to go and tell somebody else.
Yeah. So one of the things about my platform, Convene, is, and I'll tell you a story about cyberbullying real quick, but on Convene, we've built in an extreme amount of anonymity on discussion boards. You can post a discussion board anonymous. You can answer anonymous. We have what's called experience, and I'm going to talk about an experience because I believe we all learn through experience. So we have experiences, and you can be the writer of an experience anonymously. In there, you can answer questions anonymously. Now, why is that important? And I'll tell you a quick story. I have a daughter. Her name is Lainey. And a number of years ago, when I was creating the platform, Lainey was going through a tough time on Instagram. She was getting cyberbullied, and it was by her best friends that were cyberbullying her. And so she was writing about it one day. I asked her, I said, Lainey, can you sit down and write an experience? I just wanted to see if she could do it. And when she sat down, she kept turning around and she kept looking at me, and she was going, and I didn't know what she was writing this experience about. I had no idea, right? I just explained to her the concept. It's so you can write about your life experience. You can reach out and ask for help. People can interact with you. And she was saying, Dad, they won't know it's me, will they? They won't know that I wrote this, will they? And I was like, no, they won't know. And I hadn't even made this part anonymous. She goes, you promise they won't know that I wrote this, will they? And so I was like, no, they won't know. And when I sat down and read what she wrote, her name is Lainey. She was writing from the point of view of Olivia. And she was talking about Olivia being cyberbullied on Instagram by her friends. And what she was doing is she was reaching out for help. She was putting it out there so other people could read what she wrote and they could answer with their experience, with what they had gone through. But we all know this, right? We don't like to share our dirt. We don't want to put ourselves out there, because if you're sharing your dirt, you're outing yourself. But if you could do it anonymously, maybe you just will reach out. So inside of Convene, there's people that write about their experiences with alcoholism, depression, you name it, it's on there. But it started with Lainey. It started with a 13-year-old girl writing an experience about being cyberbullied as if she were Olivia, telling what she was going through. And I think that that's okay if there's a safe space where people know that they can come to and they can talk, because we all just want to reach out and get help when we need help, right? And that's so important, because inside we worry so much about judgment. And like y'all are saying, social media can be a brutal place. So where do people go? I mean, what do people do when, how do you guys open it up for people when they need help, to know it's okay to come and get that help? How are some ways that, safe place, how do you reach out to people? What kind of things do y'all do?
From personal experience, I find, because I'm a talker, I don't know if you've noticed that. But,
I am too. Did you notice that?
yeah, I talk all day. Most people don't have a problem opening up to me, but I have found over the course of the last year and a half that text messaging gives them that blanket of anonymity. So they're willing at all hours of the day and night to discuss things that are really difficult to say face to face, and knowing that it's a judgment-free zone. And regardless of whether or not they come forward and say, I want that protection order now, and tomorrow they say, no, I don't want that, that somebody is going to always be in their corner. Yeah. And just listen at their pace.
Well, and that's why it's so important to have positive mentors. That's why I was saying, you guys are positive mentors, and you've walked through it, right? Stephanie, you've walked through it. So you can say, I've been there, I've walked through it. And if you'll just trust in me and help me guide you through this process, then maybe you'll help them come out. You'll help them go through it, where otherwise they might be scared because they don't know what to expect. They don't. And Stephanie, talk about that a little bit. How do you help people?
So one of the main things that I do when we come into contact with somebody is let them know that we don't work for the courts, because that is a barrier to getting close to them. So we let them know that, whatever we talk about is between us, unless you want us to share that with prosecution. And then there's a form that they sign before we do it. But knowing that we're not part of the court staff is very helpful. And, sometimes you level with them. You don't always bring your personal experience into it, but sometimes when you don't understand, you've never been here, you don't know what I'm going through. It's really, sometimes it's helpful to say, no, I haven't been in your exact situation, but I have been in that low place, and I know how lonely it is, and I know how much it hurts, and we are here if you need to talk. And usually that's just about all it takes.
Yeah. Haley, what's your thoughts on that?
I mean, I definitely disagree with that. Usually once you let them know, like, no, we don't work for the courts. What they say with us is confidential. It's between us. And then really once you tell them, like, I've been here before, they just really open up. It's almost like you can see kind of like the guard being let down when you're like, no, I haven't exactly been in this situation, but I've gone through some things. And then they just open right up usually.
Trust. They find a trust with you. And when they
Yeah.
find that trust, it's what they need to be able to reach out and let their guard down. Because you got to think about this. And we all know this, right? Somebody that's in that situation, where's their guard? Their guard is up. They're fight or flight. They're in fight mode, right? They're ready to go at people. They don't want to talk until they can find that trust, because they don't trust you. If they don't, you might be the enemy. So until you gain that trust, they're not going to open up to you. Teresa, is that what you find as well?
Absolutely. And it's about showing up and doing what you say you're going to do as an advocate. Unfortunately, some of our survivors and victims that we have engaged with have been failed tremendously by programs. And we have to build that trust that we're not going to fail them again. And so, sometimes it's a slow walk. They'll give you a little bit of information and see what you're going to do with that information and see if you're going to call them back on Thursday at 5:00, like you said. And if you do, then okay, you made it a little bit further with them. So it's really slowing down. And then I think the other thing of it is like listening.
Yeah.
Too often we just want to talk about services. This is what we have to do for you, but we have to slow down and just be a listening ear.
Absolutely.
And then validate their experience. I believe you are some of the most powerful words a person will ever hear who has experienced victimization.
Yep.
That shame, that stigma that's attached to victimization is so powerful that it can make that person believe that they have some responsibility in their victimization, especially if their perpetrator is telling them, nobody's going to believe you. You brought this on yourself. If you had a cooked dinner and had things ready, this wouldn't have happened. When they're constantly hearing that self-blame starts to kick in and it's internalized at a high rate. So when the service providers show up and we just say, I believe you, how can I help you? I'm here. If you go back, I'm here still.
Yeah.
I am not leaving. You can come to us no matter what. We have to take that barrier down because too often we see that sometimes people go back in relationships for various reasons. And when they go back, we can't judge them. We have to come at them with a compassionate heart and just support them where they are in that moment.
Yeah. And so we have a comment here. Lisa says, this resonates with me so much. Got my first order of protection from my husband in 1988. There was little support back then. I eventually went into a shelter in 1996. And at that point, there was some support. It took me a long time to get out, but kudos to these ladies. You're all saving lives.
That's nice.
Yep. And Lisa says, and Lisa says, I left 11 times and she went back 10. Now, I will tell you that Lisa is a big part of my life. She's a huge friend of mine. She's a part of Convene. And we've talked about this. And so, again, it's the support that you ladies, and not just you ladies, this is key to your area, but this is everywhere. This is everywhere. It's all across the country. And it's, again, I find this is such an important topic and such important work that you guys are doing. Yeah. So Lisa, I love you. She's one of my closest friends and I just care about her. And I appreciate you saying that tonight. So that's awesome. Go ahead, Catherine.
So I want to talk a little bit about the stigma because we talk about in addiction and recovery, the stigma. We talk about some of our journeys where some of us go out and speak and talk about our actual experiences to help reduce that. Teresa mentioned education. Stephanie mentioned prevention. So what are we doing on those levels in our communities to reduce, first of all, the stigma so that our victims feel comfortable to come and, talk to someone? But how are we getting that message out? How is that happening on that local level in our communities in regards to reducing stigma through education and prevention?
I find for us here at Homesafe, it's a perpetual dialogue, not just with the court, but with law enforcement, those working in the schools, even with service providers, and letting them know application into practice. It's as simple as having a conversation with somebody and listening to what they have to say. And that dialogue doesn't stop the minute that they walk out the door, or that dialogue doesn't stop the minute that a training session is over or a court hearing is over. That dialogue and that continuing education happens constantly. And just being willing to to talk and answer questions and be honest and be direct, and don't dance around an issue because it makes you uncomfortable. Ask the question and give an honest answer.
So are we currently working with law enforcement, our judicial system, all of those separate components to educate those in that system on truly reducing stigma, what's available? How are we getting that message out to the community that services are available, that, you know, this is something that's preventable? How are we doing that?
I
Before
feel
COVID,
Ashtabula County, we are so blessed because the judges and the magistrates are so open to listening and hearing what we have to say and asking. They genuinely care about our clients, about those that come before them, about those that haven't come before them. I mean, they genuinely want to know. As for law enforcement, they're amazing. When we are able to get together and have those trainings, they show up and they're there and they listen. They really listen.
So go ahead, Stephanie. You were
yeah,
going
I
to
was
say.
just going to say that before COVID, the other thing that happened a lot, we used to partner with Homesafe, and we were at every fair, every community event, had our tables out with our pamphlets, and just having that visibility so people could see that the resources are in the community. And the other thing that I think is really powerful to take away that stigma that you talked about is when survivors use their voice. Survivors have used their voice to really take away the stigma. As a survivor of childhood sex abuse, I use my voice to like talk about it and say, hey, you can live a healthy lifestyle. You can overcome this. And I think the more survivors that have started speaking up lately, we are seeing the shift where some of that stigma is no longer attached and is being placed on the individuals that's causing harm instead of other victims. And so as more survivors speak up and as more survivors get support in this area, we'll see that shift take place. And I definitely think we are in the process of that shift happening.
Yeah. Lisa said she'd love to see all this training, these trainings inside of Convene. So would I, because I think it's so important to give somebody a place to turn. Now, I do want to say this. I do want to ask this. And Stephanie, I'll ask you, right? Like I can only see that this is scary. If you have to go through this process, right? And then you know that, you have to step out on your own because first you're brave enough to go through the court and go through the process. And then you have to step out on your own after that. Once you've gone through that process, I can only just imagine the courage that it takes to do that. So what else? What else? I know you guys focus in the courts, but obviously, Homesafe, what you talked about, the shelter. What else? What then? How do you help people? What's the next steps of support for people, just so they know?
Well, I think it varies. I think another huge part of this job is to, when you hear someone asking, why did they stay? Why did they go back? What is wrong with you that you chose this? You stop that conversation, you shut that down, and you redirect it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is adding to a stigma, that is re-victimizing. And it's just awful to hear those comments because it is so hard and so dangerous to leave, and to leave for good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you said it took Lisa 11 times, right? And she went back 10. That is huge.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the average number is 7. So stopping those negative comments when you hear them, it lends survivors to believe that you actually care, for one. As Shawneen said, we keep the lines of communication open.
Mm-hmm.
We've made the support group online. We're trying to get them together in person now because doing support groups through Zoom is not ideal because half of our clients are still with their perpetrators.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's not ideal to do it through Zoom. I mean, we can't do this alone, but with at least 2 of us, we have gone out to a client's home. The perpetrator was in custody, so it wasn't a dangerous situation at that point. But she needed some help with moving a couple of things, and we went out and did that. So it's just letting them know that no matter what happens, we're there. That's what the shelter's there for. We have 24-hour hotline. It's just about getting them immersed in services so they know that they have more support than just the advocate, and stopping the negative comments and conversations.
Yeah.
And a
So
lot
I
of
have a
times they do know
question,
that those.
ladies. I have a question for you ladies. Do you have training programs in place where you help teach them skills or further an education so that they can feel like they can be a contributing member of society and they are able to take care of themselves? Because a lot of them that I've dealt with, they went back because they didn't know how they were going to survive on their own. Everything had been done for them. How do we make them feel comfortable enough and strong enough within their own life skills or a trade that we can teach them? Maybe we partner with other people so that we can give them job training, and we can maybe set up some kind of apprenticeships where they know if they go and start there, they can get a job. And it's a way for them to know that, hey, I can go get an apartment, a house, I can take care of myself, I can take care of my children, and I'm okay with that. What do we do?
So we just opened up in the Cuyahoga County area, drop-in center for human trafficking. And it's doing just what you said. It's where anybody who has experienced some form of sex trafficking or labor trafficking can drop into this facility and connect with people that help them with financial literacy, will help them with job coaching, help them with develop a plan in order to identify the goals that they need to accomplish, whether it's a 3-month goals or 6-month goals, and they can work with a legal attorneys in a legal clinic. And what we see that individuals need wraparound services. It's not just the advocacy piece, but it's the wraparound services to help them be able to be stable and out of some of these very unsafe situations. Because what we know, when people are not safe financially, they don't have shelter, but they don't have access to a living wage that's reasonable, that the ability for perpetrators to take advantage of them increases tremendously. I did want to go real back to training. I think what we're doing with training is not enough, because we're training people once they get on a job out in the field. The training that law enforcement receive with regards to responding to sexual assault when they're in the police academy is almost only an hour worth of training. And that's not enough training for first responders who are engaging with these victims, typically hours sometimes after they've been victimized. So I am working with Chief Harris of Cuyahoga County at Cuyahoga Community College, where at the police academy there now, we have increased it to 4 to 6 hours of additional training that the officers receive while they're in the academy from the director's time of the academy. But that's not built in yet for OPATA. And when I talk to prosecutors and attorneys, they don't receive training on trauma-informed care. They don't receive training understanding neurobiology of trauma and all that stuff. So when we really need to start putting this trainings inside of higher educational institutions where people are learning about their job, because if they can get this training while they're in school, and then they can start putting the application into place as soon as they start the job on day one, we're doing a lot better for survivors in the communities. But right now, we're playing catch up. We're playing catch up. I train law enforcement across the country and prosecutors across the country, and we're playing catch up. Some of the terminology and things that I'm saying, folks who have been on the job for 15, 20 years have no understanding of what we're talking about when we talk about the body's response to trauma. That when somebody experiences trauma, they have high levels of cortisol in their body for 72 hours. And the way you interview them can re-trigger this hormone tsunami. And they're trained to interview victims the same way they interview offenders. And that's not helpful. You're not going to get what you need out of that victim to make a case when you're interviewing her or him as though they're an offender. So people are switching over to trauma-informed interview techniques or the forensic experimental trauma-informed interview technique. We really, like I said, are behind the curve and really need to start training people as soon as they identify this is what I'm going to school for. Then you need to train it now and not on the job.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm a firm believer in annual training. My background having come from the prison, I'm just saying annual training goes beyond your weapons requalification, your CPR training. Things change from year to year to year. I know with Department of Rehabilitation and Correction, as I transitioned out and came back to social work, they were heavy into trauma-informed care with the offenders that were inside. And that was part of our curriculum, teaching the staff. So we had to be taught that so that we could in turn go back and teach the staff. Was it a hard sell? Absolutely. When you have people that are 15 and 16 years in, they're not trying to hear any of that. And sometimes you have to get on law enforcement's level or corrections level and speak their speak so they understand, I'm trying to help you, help them, so that the outcome is you don't have to come back here in 25 minutes or tomorrow night or next weekend, and you can deal with these individuals.
Well, it's a different type of learning too, right? You can't just
Yes.
put somebody in the middle of a video and have them watch a video about sexual trauma and expect them to understand how to deal with that situation. You have to get into experiential learning. You have to talk about it. You have to talk about people who've been through it. You have to build in more than just, let's put a video in front of you. Let's bring this into that learning where there's back and forth, where you're talking to people who are a victim, people that have been through it, or you're talking to police officers who have gone through that training and been out there in the field and that are experts in it. So you learn. That's one of the things that I believe in, and it drives me nuts when we got training, watch this video, that's not training. You're not learning from that. There's no learning taking place. And that's not the right training that we should be putting people through. It has to be engaged training where people are interacting and learning from each other. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I wanted to put this out here real quick. There was a question. Marty said, my question is, from bullying to rape, how does this affect an individual mentally? All right. And he said, could the bullies or abusers have suffered from mental issues prior? So what do you think about that question? Obviously, it does. If you have been bullied or you have been raped, there is a lot of mental anguish that goes on. There is that trauma that goes on, as you were talking about it, Teresa, that trauma that goes on, the different hormonal levels, the different triggers inside of it, the PTSD, the moral injury that comes along with just being a part of that. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, what are some types of things that you see in victim advocacy where you're trying to help people? Anyone?
I think the reality, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that a lot of survivors of sexual assault, they don't access counseling services until about 10 years post-victimization. And because of that, the person can experience a lot of, have developed some really unhealthy coping skills to deal with their trauma. And when people have unhealthy coping skills, too often it can lead to some mental health issues. It can lead to very unsafe decisions that they might make because of those unhealthy coping skills. And so I think we have to find a way to continually eliminate barriers for people to access services post-victimization. But with regards to, I think the question, could the bullies or abusers have suffered from mental issues prior? I don't think we have completed enough research in that area. It's really hard to find, especially with adult offenders. There is a lot of research with regards to juvenile offenders that if they are given the right adequate mental health services, wraparound services, support, and some accountability, that offending behavior can be stopped early. But we need to really identify tools and methods to help stop and prevent adult offenders. Years ago, the state lost a lot of money when it was coming to some of the sex offender programming that was taking place inside of the prison institutions. And when that happened, probation officers who didn't have any training were now required to run the sex offender groups. And when you have that type of setup, we're not helping people. We're sending them to prison, but we're not helping them. We're not giving them the tools because they're going to come back home. So we have to change what rehabilitation looks like in our society if we really want to stop victimization from taking place.
Yeah. Catherine, we have about 5 more minutes. So I want to give you a chance to ask a question, and then we'll give Deborah a chance to ask, and then we'll be ready to have the closing comments from the ladies.
So I want to talk a little bit about the financial aspect of advocacy. as I'm sure both agencies are aware, the state had cut our allocations to our victim advocates, to our VOCA and to Homesafe. So, and I don't know, Teresa, if your funds were cut as well.
Yeah, we received about a $2 million cut.
Okay, so as a county commissioner, one of the things that I'm able to do in advocacy in a different role for our victims and for our resources is to advocate on a federal and state level to make sure that we're getting the dollars needed. And right now we are actively working with our legislators. Teresa, I would love to talk to you after this and have you provide a letter so that we can be passing that on not only to our legislators here in Ohio, but as well as our federal legislators. We are out of Ashtabula County working on that nationally and locally. So it's critical. It's another piece of advocacy and how our legislators can actually help our victims remove some of those barriers by having those dollars available so that you can complete programming, so that you can complete those resources, so that they can be in the courts and that they are here working. You know, our Homesafe advocates work closely with VOCA, our victims of crime advocacy here right on the campus here in Jefferson. So I would love to get with you and talk
Absolutely.
with you more so that we can advocate for those dollars. You know, if we can at least get some money restored into our budgets, I think that that's one of the ways that I, as a commissioner, as an elected official, can help with advocacy for both entities.
Yeah, Commissioner, I'm not sure if you might be aware of this, but today the House they were actually voting on HR 1652, the VOCA fix bill, and the VOWRU today to hopefully increase funding and to not have another cut at a high rate. So that's something that we have been working and was hoping that people today sent out to Representative Dave Joyce and Representative Anthony Gonzalez. I'm reading off my phone so I can make sure I get these names correct. But we actually today is a day that hopefully, you know, they voted and they voted right so we can not see another additional cut, because what people don't know, Ohio was hit hard with regards to the VOCA cut across a lot of programs. Victim service programs had to lay staff off. They had to cut their hours. They had to cut back on programming. And it was right in the middle of the pandemic when this happened. And we have talked about the increase, and we have an increase, but we have a shortage of services. And so this needs to be fixed.
I don't think it was realized that in the middle of the pandemic that we were going to see the increase that was going to be needed for services.
Absolutely.
And when that 40% cut hit Ohio, it was devastating. Whether you were a small agency or a large agency, 40% is an impact to your budget. Like you said, it means layoffs. It means, you know, cutting resources. And, you know, that's where it's critical to make sure that we have these dollars flowing into our communities to, you know, help our victims, to get them to be that survivor, to get them to be able to live that healthy lifestyle. So we're hoping that, like you said, that they did vote accordingly. We are following that bill. It is something we are looking at. Obviously, those monies come through our office to fund VOCA. So we have been watching them very closely. And but there's a lot more advocacy out there. I sit nationally on the National Association of Counties on the Health and Human Services Board. So, you know, having a voice, we have a voice at the table, let's utilize it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so Deborah will come to you, but I hate to say it. I think a lot of mental health professionals were jumping up and down when the whole pandemic started because it was not a surprise that what was coming. I mean, it was, everybody knew this was going to come. And I just think it was Unfortunately, it got miscommunicated, and unfortunately, a lot of things fell through the holes, the cracks and all that. But here we are, right? Fortunately, here we are. We got to get going, and we got to make the changes and do right, because this is going to be an impact that goes a long time, right? So Deborah, go ahead and say things.
I want to say that I feel that us in the counseling world need to really get in with the police departments, with the courts and with the prosecutors, to really train them and be on those calls with them. Because if they don't understand what mental health really looks like, it's a difference from mental health and anger. And they need to know that. We need to help them to help those who are in need of the help. Because in a traumatic situation, both people are victims, even though one may be the perpetrator, because it's gotten out of control. So we need to be able to help everybody involved to maybe make the offender not do it again, and protect the victim so it won't happen to them again. Also, just to bring it out, there's going to be a march, May the 12th. They're going to go to Columbus for domestic violence, and they're going to be on the steps. So I have to get paperwork to all you ladies where they're asking survivors of domestic violence, or if they've lost somebody, that they bring a photo of their loved one and just say a speech for 1 minute or 2 minutes, because they're trying to get the bill passed where they wear the ankle monitors so that they can sort of keep track of the sexual predators or the abusive husbands or wives, so that they can track them to let the victim know, hey, they're in your area, go to safety. So they're going to do a big program in the Capitol there in Columbus on the steps, May the 12th, domestic violence.
Awesome. So Teresa, we'll go to you real quick just for a couple of closing comments, and then we'll go to the Homesafe ladies.
I just quickly want to say to anybody that's watching this that might have experienced sexual violence, human trafficking, or domestic violence, that I'm sorry that you've had to experience that. You're not alone. There's help for you. You have a great space at Homesafe. You have the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center as a resource, and the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center 24-hour hotline and text and chat hotline is 440-423-2020. You can call that number, text it, it's available. But help is here for you, and you don't have to do this alone.
Ladies?
Well, thank you for having us on.
Yes.
And for Homesafe, if you need services, it's 440-992-2727 for the shelters hotline. They have direct contact information for us in Jefferson if anyone needs a protection order in Ashtabula County.
And you are not alone.
So, ladies, thank you for being on tonight. I think this is just incredible. Catherine and Deborah, I look forward to this night every month. I mean, it's you guys are just such a blessing. You're making such a difference in people's lives, and just raising awareness about these important topics are just so important. So I just want to say thank you to all of you. And this has been a great night. And, again, we're here to support each other, lift each other up, and make a difference. So, Catherine, you got anything else?
I do. Next month, third Monday in April, or third Tuesday. I've even changed our night, Matthew.
Yeah.
I changed our time. I changed our night. April is Child Abuse Prevention. So we are going to actually be talking about abuse and neglect, and how it can be prevented, and what's happening around our communities with that. So we will be lining up the speakers to look forward to that conversation with some national guests.
Yeah. And I do want to stress that, because I told you my wife, works in pediatric emergency department. If everybody in the country does not think it's a problem right now, you're missing it, because they're filling up. They're not filling up the ED with kids with COVID. They're filling up the ED with kids who are victims of abuse, thinking about committing suicide, attempting suicide, drug overdoses. These are the things that we're filling up the emergency departments with when it comes to our youth. And so this is, again, it's another just incredibly important topic that please be here, on the night, because it's going to be great. It's, again, we're trying to raise that awareness. All right, we've gone over time. I could continue to talk, we can talk forever, but I won't stop. But we're over time. So I appreciate everybody watching. I appreciate the comments. Again, ladies, I appreciate y'all being a part of it. So thank you very much for everything that you do. And like I said, you guys are role models, and it takes role models and mentors to help people in this situation. So thank you for everything. Y'all
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ladies, for
Thank
coming.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. See you next time.